You're listening to the Bulldog Insider Podcast, sponsored by Essentia Health.
It only takes one step, twist, or crunch to know something doesn't feel right. Essentia Health's orthopedic and sports medicine team gets you back to doing what you love with commitment, resilience, intention. We're here to keep you moving forward. Visit essentiahealth.org to learn more about orthopedics and sports medicine, like nowhere else.
Hello and welcome to the Bulldog Insider Podcast, brought to you by Essentia Health. I'm Matt Wellens, the Bulldogs hockey beat writer at the Duluth News Tribune and the Rink Live.
And I'm Zach Schneider, the television voice of UMD Hockey on My9 Sports.
Joining us this week on the podcast is the new athletic director for Bulldog Athletics. He's someone I worked with in my previous life, covering Northern Michigan hockey, which kind of seems like a long, long time ago. For as long as we've been doing this. Welcome to the podcast, Forrest Karr.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You're okay working with me again after all these years? That didn't discourage you from this job?
Yeah, I was trying to think how many years ago that was when you moved over here.
So we're in season 5 of the podcast, and I think this is my 9th season, I said.
9th.
It's about time to ship him back to the UP.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the contract says, but 10 years I think has got to be enough.
10 years would put me on par with how long I covered Northern hockey. So we're inching closer to that breaking point there, where I've covered the Bulldogs longer than the Wildcats. Forrest is new to UMD, as we mentioned, hired in August, but a college hockey veteran, way more college hockey veteran than Zach and I here. You played, I'm not trying to say you're old or anything right now, but you played at Notre Dame, a goalie under Dave Poulin. Dave was your coach, right?
Yep.
Back in the late 90s. You're also a volunteer goalie coach for Mark Johnson, right?
Yeah, and actually Trina Bourget the year before Mark arrived. So 3 years with the University of Wisconsin women's team. Yep.
There's a lot of people around here that don't know Wisconsin women's. I would be that, don't know Wisconsin women's hockey pre-Mark Johnson. Do you remember those days, Zach?
No. Mark's been there for how many years now? It's got to be...
Oh, boy, that first year would have been, let's see, 01, 02 with Trina. And she left partway through the year. I ended up coaching with Tracy Cornell and Dan Cook. We actually upset the Duluth women's team in the WCHA tournament, but then Duluth went on to win the NCAA tournament. So that was a big year for them. They were a strong program.
Yeah, so he's been there almost as long as Scott Sandlin's been here with the men's program, and remembering a time pre-Scott Sandlin is pretty tough too. So yeah, those two have been around a while.
Forrest was also AD at both Alaska and Northern Michigan at some pretty tumultuous times at both of those programs as they shifted from CCHA to WCHA and then Northern back to the CCHA again. Forrest also, one of the reasons why I really wanted to bring Forrest on here is he has extensive knowledge of the business of sports and sports law. It was always interesting to talk with him at Northern about those topics. It makes you particularly interesting now, Forrest, with everything that's going on at this point in history with NCAA athletics. But before we get into that geeky stuff, I'm going to call it geeky stuff, I think we should start by, because Zach will want me to address this. I'm calling it the biggest controversy to hit UMD athletics ever in all of history. Zach sees the sarcasm in my voice here right now.
Rolling my eyes. No, you're going to get me in trouble.
I am. I'm going to get you in trouble. Let's go for it. I haven't got you in trouble yet this season. I haven't got myself in trouble yet. That was the introduction of the new champ costume. That lasted 1 week. Was that it? Did it make it longer than that?
One day. I think I don't even know if it made it a week.
Less than a week, yeah.
Less than a week. It was recalled for the old champ after an outcry by Bulldog fans. Zach and I differ on our opinion of new champ. Zach, not a fan to say the least, right?
Yeah. In a public forum, I was not in favor of the change. That's about as far as I'll go.
Me, I didn't care. I think Bruce Siskey was on my side. We just didn't. Thought it was fine. I thought it was fine. Maybe it's because I've been hugged by the old champ and it was kind of getting nasty.
Yeah,
it smelled like a dog.
Let's be clear. I didn't like the new champ, but I was not part of the mob on social media that was out to get everyone who was part of that decision. And that's the part of the didn't care. I think, if that's who the champ was, then that's what it was going to be. But I'm happy with the gray one.
Forrest, can we get your side of the whole? We're not going to spend a whole ton of time on the podcast on this, but I feel like we have to address the dog costume controversy, as I joked here in the office when I've had to write a little bit about it. You weren't involved in the design of the costume, were you?
No, there were a lot of people that did great work on that for over a year, going back. I think maybe to step back from the UMD costume change, anytime you go through any kind of rebranding, anytime you look at, updating a logo, anytime you look at some type of slogan, anything that people have an emotional attachment to, it's really important to just bring people in and include a lot of voices, have community forums, have committees involved, make sure a lot of people review it, have input. And so that's really what we're going to do here going forward. I think that the work that was done was great work, and we can build off of that going forward. So, the main things are kind of the health and safety of the performers. The modern mascot costumes include a cooling system, and we want to make sure that we incorporate that in whatever we end up with. We want to make sure that we maintain some of the history of the logo and not change things too much. It's really important that you preserve that history because it's been the same champ costume for decades now. I've been told maybe over 30 years. So we're going to want something that ends up looking pretty close to the mascot costume that people are familiar with. And then the other thing, we do want to bring the school colors into the final costume in some way, and I don't know what that's going to mean exactly. And we'll have people give input. We'll have people vote on the final, the costume that's going to be selected. But we do want to incorporate the school colors. If you look at the University of Minnesota system, the other system schools, their mascots do incorporate the school colors, and I think that's something that we can end up with. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we'll try to get there. So we're going to have a lot of people give input. People. When they go through this type of process, they want to unveil something, and there's a tendency to want to generate a lot of excitement with something new. But if you do that, then sometimes you're not including enough voices. So probably the safer path is to include a lot of people along the way, and what that means is that a lot of people will end up seeing it before the final costume is unveiled. But I think on balance, that's probably the better approach for us here, and that's what we're going to do over the next year or so.
I felt bad for Forrest when it comes out because you maybe had been on the job for a week at that point, and people are going off on social media.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think it was a good, as tumultuous as that process was for a new AD, I think it signified something. And Matt and I know a lot of the same people that you're talking about that probably worked on that and were here for the entire process from start to finish with that. But it really signified what the UMD athletics department is you saw a negative response to what was unveiled, and you came up with a quick decision to solve it, include a lot of those community voices that were upset with what happened. So, I mean, in the end, PR-wise, which is, my specialty, I think that it came across as UMD being, connected with the people that are most important to it, or some of the people that are most important to it, which are the fans. So It worked out all right in the end.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I was really impressed by the creativity of the people that did comment. I thought it was very civil. It wasn't mean-spirited. People found a way to communicate what they were thinking, but they did it often in a funny way. So it was fine. We heard from people, and we will take that input, and the end product will just be that much better for it. So I think this will end up being a good process, and people will be happy with the end result.
I put the champ costume on before too, just at a couple events, and I was the designated champ mascot because we didn't have a student or a volunteer to do it, and it's hot in there. So I'll vouch for that. If you can find a way to keep those people cool, that would be a big benefit.
Yeah.
It's also, you're a tall guy. That costume's not made for tall people, is it?
I think I was hitting my head on the top of the bulldog head quite a bit, but that's
I've seen some bulldogs where the pants look like capris more than. It is time for a new. Anyone that just wants to keep the old costume, it's time for a new one. You did rebrands at both Alaska and at Northern Michigan. You actually reached out to me on Northern, and I always tell people he did it so he could get a advance if I was going to make fun of the new logo or anything like that. And it was so good. I had no jokes, nothing at all. Anyone that knows me on Twitter, I'll come up with something. I had nothing at all. It was done really well. Did you experience any kind of blowback at Northern and Alaska when you did changes there?
I learned some lessons from the process we went through in Alaska. And then when we did it at Northern, I was very adamant that we take our time. And we spent about 2 years on that process. So we really did. We brought in a private company to help guide us through that process. The interesting thing there was that we were actually rebranding the entire university logo as well. So it was the university, kind of the academic logo, as well as the athletic department, the Wildcat logo. So yeah, we were very deliberate, probably slower than some people would like. But again, we wanted to incorporate the school colors when we did that. I don't know if you remember that process at all, but we had a Wildcat logo that was actually black and yellow, and it was the school colors of I liked that logo. A school a little bit north of us, and we thought, when our primary school color was green, that we should incorporate that in the final logo. But we wanted to preserve the history, so it's kind of a similar situation that we have here, and we'll just follow a similar process.
Yeah, unfortunately, UMD's not going to be able to get away from getting away from the colors of its rival. That's not going to happen here, unfortunately.
It depends on who you view the rival as. A lot of people would say North Dakota and St. Cloud State are the big rivals, at least on the hockey side. So you can stay away from green and red and black, right? Yeah. I think so.
Yep. You bet.
All right, let's move on to topics that actually have legitimate impacts on people's lives, not just mascot costumes. As I mentioned, it's an interesting time in NCAA athletics. The NCAA is undergoing major changes. That's probably an understatement. Right now, there's the Division I Transformation Committee that's heading up kind of this evolution of the NCAA to modernize it. And I'm going to try and focus this conversation because I feel like it can go in a million directions. But Forrest, what I want to start with, how do the changes that are happening now in the NCAA, how do those specifically impact a school like UMD that's mostly D2 but has D1 programs like men's and women's hockey? How are these changes impacting the Bulldogs?
Well, it's going to depend what the changes end up being, So we don't have direct involvement in those discussions, so we do not have the opportunity to kind of shape the end result, and so that's something that we can't really change, but we're gonna follow it. My biggest hope is that as they go through this process, that they take gender equity into account right from the start. Because we don't want to get in a situation where we have two sports that are identical, men's hockey and women's hockey, and we have kind of a different set of rules in place. So, for instance, I'm hoping that they don't say, one gender has unlimited scholarships, but the other one has some certain cap. I'm hoping that they don't say one gender has unlimited coaches, one gender has limited to 3 or 4 or 5. I'm hoping that as they do this, that they're setting these caps wherever they are equally so that it allows athletic departments to kind of be easier for athletic departments to take gender equity into account as we make our own institutional decisions within these limits that are defined.
What are some of the changes that have gone through that you feel are good for schools like UMD so far?
Well, so far there's a lot of different things that they put in place, and some people are still trying to sort out exactly what all of it means. For instance, they've said that you can pay for elite level training. What does that mean in the summer? And so you have to sort out if somebody's going to an NHL camp, if somebody's going out to California to train with a special strength and conditioning coach. What do these kind of things mean? So we're still really early in this process. We're kind of coming up with these parameters and guidelines, but then once they're voted on, once they're implemented, the question is, devil's in the details. What do each of these things actually mean? So some schools are going to be awarding a stipend based on the Alston decision that took place. And so some of the Big Ten schools are going down that path, some of the larger institutions. And then some of the smaller schools, mid-level size schools, are kind of watching that and deciding at what point will we jump in. And so, I think during the COVID time, the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey, was saying that sometimes, there's a lot of wisdom in kind of waiting and not being first, right? You want to kind of watch people test the waters, see how these different opportunities shake out, what's available, and then decide what works for your institution. So that's kind of where we are right now.
How confident or optimistic are you that, now being at UMD and I think Alaska and Northern Michigan kind of fit into this mold too, where, you're not in Alabama football, you're not Duke basketball, North Carolina basketball, those really big money college athletics. I mean, obviously there's still, a lot at stake at UMD, but these changes that are being discussed, how optimistic are you that they're not going to be just for that high level and then kind of trickle down, that they're going to benefit a school like UMD, where it's, maybe, has a couple Division I schools or Division I sports, mostly Division II, but it's kind of in that mid-level. Are these changes going to be good across the board, or is that yet to be seen?
It's hard to say where it'll end up. A lot of the NIL opportunities, started with the bigger football schools, the autonomy schools. It's kind of working its way into basketball, just starting to get into hockey now. So you have groups of former players maybe that are pooling money or collecting money, and then, talking with current players about opportunities that are available to them. So if they do certain things on social media, then they'll get some type of stipend. And so those things are just coming into hockey right now. So it's still early in this. Again, a lot of the conversations have been around football and basketball, just starting to filter in some of the bigger schools in the sport of hockey. So again, we'll see where it shakes out, and we'll certainly do everything we can to be involved and create opportunities for athletes.
You mentioned we're still learning and changing. I think NIL is a great area where I don't think everyone quite knows, and correct me if I'm wrong, Forrest, I don't think everyone quite knows what that means yet. I think the original intention was athletes could profit off their likeness and go sign autographs. But now we're seeing these collectives, especially at big football programs, coming in, and I don't even know if athletes they're getting money, but I don't know if they're doing anything in return for it. And I believe the NCAA is kind of looking at that to see if that's what they want the NIL, the name, image, likeness, what they want that to be, right? That NIL is still kind of changing, and people are trying to figure out what that means, right?
Yeah, I mean, the NIL space is all based on your right of publicity. And the problem historically was that student athletes did not have the same opportunities that other students had on campus. So you could have someone like a woman who hit the game-winning shot for the University of Notre Dame, the national championship basketball game. Now she wants to go on Dancing with the Stars. The way the NCAA rules were at the time wouldn't allow her to benefit from her right of publicity, right? Now they did grant an exception to that so that she could, but the way the rules were stated, she was limited in a way that other students wouldn't be. So the question is, if you open it up, I think we all agree that student athletes should be able to benefit from their name, image, and likeness, or their right of publicity. But the fear was always that others would take advantage of that, and it would effectively be paying people as a recruiting inducement. And things opened up 2 summers ago, and pretty quickly that's what started to happen. You started to see these collectives form, and they were giving student athletes money, and it became this kind of recruiting inducement battle, right? And so the question is, what kind of parameters, guidelines, what needs to be put in place so that kind of effective paying student athletes to come to the university isn't what's occurring? And so they're still working through that, and it's a difficult line to figure out where to kind of set the parameters. And there are groups that are going to keep working on that.
Right now, I'm curious your take on the lay of the land right now as we sit here today. It seems like this so far in the 2 years that you're talking about has really, in an effort to close the gap for student athletes, it's widened the gap between universities, between the haves and the have-nots. It's really kind of created this chasm in football and basketball where if you've got the money and you've got the collectives, you can do these things. But if you don't, you're kind of left behind. And it seems like that's the problem we're trying to solve. But I'm curious about your take on, I guess, the last 2 years and how we arrived at, okay, we need a better solution than what's going on right now.
Yeah, to kind of simplify how we arrived here, historically, the NCAA had lost some cases when schools agreed together to set limits on certain things. So there's a Board of Regents case of broadcasting, Board of Regents at the University of Oklahoma. There's a case, law versus the NCAA. There's a restricted earnings case where NCAA schools had agreed that, for instance, the third hockey coach, the third member of the hockey coaching staff would be restricted in what they could earn. The NCAA lost those cases and said that this is a violation of antitrust law if a group agrees to limit people in this way. But the court had always said the NCAA can set playing rules, things that are directly related to competition. They can come up with certain things to level the playing field, so a certain number of scholarships, for example. And what happened with the Alston decision and some more recent decisions is that the court was saying that the schools can't come to agreement on those types of restrictions either, because it ends up hurting student athletes. And so, that's the logic. And so if you're put in that position as a governing organization, and they were talking about NIL and they were trying to put some restrictions in place, the NCAA basically said, look, we were just told that if we all agree as a group to put restrictions in place, that we're going to be in violation of antitrust law. So what happened that summer was that a few days left in June, they just said, okay, on July 1st, this is going to open up and name, image, and likeness is going to be allowed. And that's what they had to do. They were concerned that if they agreed to put parameters in place, they could be sued and be in violation of antitrust law. So they decided to allow it to open up. But when you completely don't put any restrictions in place, then naturally what happens is people try to take advantage of the situation. And that's what we've seen happen over the last year and a half. And that's what they're kind of going back now and saying we need to be able to kind of rein this in a little bit. Otherwise, we have the situation you're talking about with the haves and have-nots. And the whole beauty of college sports is that, you want it to be a level playing field in some way. Of course, the person who's cynical will say that, in college football, that there's a handful of schools that are regularly competing for the national championship. And in college basketball, you have the Blue Bloods that are competing for the national championship. But, as long as you have the ability to place some parameters, then you're always going to have the school who kind of makes a run in the NCAA basketball tournament. And that's the excitement of it for fans. And you don't want to end up in a place where that's not possible.
Forrest, the topic came up at NCHC Media Day, and it's been bantered about a bit, more so in men's hockey, I think, than on the women's side. But what do you see as the future of single sport conferences? There's talks that could go away, and I'm wondering, how is first, are single sports conferences, as I was going to say, or are the teams from the NCHC and the WCHA going to get absorbed into multi-sport leagues? And what are the teams in these various leagues doing to kind of stick together and talk about all these changes?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that we tend to view this in a lens from a school that's multi-divisional, that sponsors Division I men's and women's hockey. But there are many multi-divisional schools that do this in a different way. So Colorado College would be an example. Men's Division I hockey, women's Division I soccer, Division III, everything else. But you could have a school like Johns Hopkins, for instance, where hockey is not a factor at all. Division III, Division I, and men's and women's lacrosse competing in the Big Ten. So there are a lot of multi-divisional schools. This is not just a small handful of institutions. So any rule that would say that an institution needs to sponsor all of their sports at the same level would impact a large number of institutions. So I see that as unlikely. That would force a lot of member schools to make really tough decisions about what level they want to compete at. So because I think that the future of multi-divisional schools is still bright, then we get back to the single sport conference question and how is this going to impact the single sport conferences? And I don't have the answer to that. I have not had a conversation with Heather about it. I have not had a conversation with Josh Fenton about it. But I think the hope is that, the conference will be able to continue to function as is. And if not, will it function under the umbrella of a Division I multi-sport conference? Ultimately, will it in some way be affiliated with another conference that's a Division I multi-sport conference? And there's probably some models that we could have where that would work as well. So, I don't think this is a sky is falling situation. I think it's just an evolving situation. And whatever model we come up with will probably work very well. And I think that UMD will be well positioned.
You mentioned a lot of the talk, and Heather actually mentioned this, that the new NCHC Commissioner Heather Weems, the former AD at St. Cloud State. She kind of brought up a lot of the talk in the transformation committee sometimes does tend to focus on, FBS, there we go, the football bowl subdivision, the FBS schools and the Power Five. How do NCHC teams, the NCHC is probably one of the more diverse leagues you're going to see in college sports with, Colorado College is D3, UMD and St. Cloud are D2. You have varying mid-majors, North Dakota's FCS with football. Omaha's, I guess you could maybe call, they don't have football, so they're not FCS, but they're kind of in that same, that same league, the Summit League. How do those voices get heard at the NCAA level with this transformation committee? Is it just kind of sit and wait and see how things go, or are there ways that the NCHC schools can maybe get their voices heard?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an insightful question, especially for people that aren't around this all the time. The schools that sponsor Division I sports across all their sports, they have a seat at the table. They're involved in the process, either individually by serving on NCAA committees or by having their voice heard through their multi-sport conference office. So University of North Dakota, Denver, they're going to have the ability to communicate in this process and make sure that the people who are making these decisions understand kind of this single sport conference and where it fits in the whole scheme of things. So there will be a voice. It just won't come from the schools that are Division II across their multiple sports. So in the CCHA, for example, Bowling Green would be that voice. So there's an opportunity. It's just maybe not at the same level of representation that the autonomy schools might have.
Is the WCHA at an advantage because it has those 3 Big Ten members?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. Yep.
Last question I think I'm going to throw in here before we go to a break, and we'll maybe move on out of the geeky topics and onto some other stuff. But what's the collaboration been like? How are, the WCHA is pretty evenly split. You have, 4 NSIC schools that are predominantly D2, and then 3 Big Tens and St. Thomas, which is in this, I still like to call it a transition phase as they're forced up to D1. What's the collaborative nature of, these leagues like? Are there, and maybe even in the NCHC, are there differing philosophies? How do these leagues all come together to work together? I mean, we've seen it in college hockey before. When people don't work together, things get fractured and such. What's the key for college hockey maybe to stick together and, work in everyone's best interest? Maybe not an individual interest, but the best interest of the sport.
Yeah, well, most conferences are set up in a way where you have a management council and then you have a board of directors. And so, that can be defined different ways, but a typical setup, the management council is the athletic directors and the board of directors is the president. So the management council works through the details, collaborate, work together to find solutions. It's not always easy. Sometimes a school has different interests than another school, especially if the schools are very different size enrollment, different geography. And so you work through those details and you come up with a recommendation that the management council then sends to the presidents, who are the board of directors. They have the final decision, the final vote on decisions that are made. So you hope that you can work things out at the management council level so that you can send it to the board of directors, because in an ideal situation, all schools vote together and things pass unanimously, right? Doesn't always happen. Sometimes different institutional philosophies end up coming into play, and you might not have a unanimous vote. But, I think usually people are working together for the best interests of the conference, because everybody knows how important the conference is. You can't function without it. I mean, Notre Dame football has been able to for many years, but that's a rare exception, right? Most people are really dependent on each other. And if you're the strongest team and you're historically the one that has the most success, or you're one of the teams that hasn't historically had the most success, you still depend on each other. So there's a lot of collaboration that takes place in these conference meetings.
As you move forward in this, how much harder is it to be a multi-divisional school? Is it harder at all, where you've got the D1 conversations that are happening versus the Division II conversations that are happening, or are these happening kind of at a broader level and then they'll filter down to the 3 divisions, or does your staff have to monitor 2 different conversations that are happening simultaneously?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're kind of monitoring both, and we're involved in discussions with both at the Division II level and at the Division I level. The biggest challenge is just going to be, funding and resources going forward, that if the rules open up so much that it's just kind of unlimited scholarships, unlimited coaching, that'll make it a little bit difficult for smaller schools to kind of keep up with, being able to kind of commit those types of resources to the Division I programs at the expense of the Division II programs. And you certainly want to be able to continue to do both at a very high level. And the University of Minnesota Duluth, one of the main reasons that I, looked at this opportunity was it's a wonderful community and great opportunities for my family and my daughters, but also the history of success with both Division II level and the Division I level. And I think that can continue.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have more with Bulldogs AD Forrest Karr. You're listening to the Bulldog Insider Podcast, brought to you by Essentia Health.
Hey there, my name is Wyatt Buckner, and I'm the host of the Duluth News Tribune Minute Podcast. Hear the most important news of the day, including weather and sports from Duluth, Minnesota, and from around the Northland. Join me and my fellow reporters as we take you through the local news you need to start your day. Episodes are released Monday through Friday and are available on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for supporting local journalism.
Hi, I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Explore Superior and Douglas County history with me on Archive Dive, a monthly podcast available at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to the Bulldog Insider Podcast, brought to you by Essentia Health, Orthopedics, and Sports Medicine. They're proud to be the team physicians for the UMD Bulldogs and provide sports medicine care to more than 25,000 student-athletes in the community to ensure they can compete at the highest level while protecting their long-term health and athletic futures. Thanks to Essentia Health for their support of the Bulldog Insider Podcast. I'm Matt Wellens here with Zach Schneider and Bulldogs AD Forrest Karr. Some final questions for Forrest before we wrap things up. We mentioned Heather Weems a couple times in this podcast, the new NCHC commissioner. Continuing we're going to wrap up the NCAA talk, but she had a memorable quote from NCHC Media Day, and I'll read it here. Obviously, the NCAA and its member institutions have aspects we need to modernize, but lately it seems we get so caught up in the business of sport that we forget about the meaning of sport. College athletics is at its essence about relationships and learning. For a great majority of student athletes across the country, their athletic careers will end in graduation caps and gowns. But the friendships and mentorships, connections, growth, and life skills gained from their participation will continue long after. Heather was a former student athlete at Iowa, a rower, if I'm correct. Forrest, when you think about that quote and what Heather was talking about, what were some of your favorite memories as a student athlete at Notre Dame, and how have those kind of influenced, how you lead an athletic department and maybe even how you approach some of the changes that the NCAA is proposing?
Yeah, I think I did touch on this just a little bit briefly in my kind of opening press conference, but I think I view everything we do through the lens of that. I hope our student athletes have an experience that was similar to my experience, right, in college. So I got there. Our team struggled the first couple of years. I did not get a lot of playing time. And you work through those things and you learn those lessons. And our team continued to get better. Junior year, senior year, we had some good seasons. I was getting more playing time. And it was one of those things where you kind of work with a group that becomes your best friends, and you work through those 4 years, and by the end of it, it's in a better place than when you got there. And my hope for every athlete is that can happen. Now, naturally, it doesn't always work that way. There's a little bit of a roller coaster, and programs kind of go up and down, and there are reasons for that. Injuries can play into it, but our number one priority is always to keep student athletes safe. That's the number one thing in every single decision we make. Always be in compliance, and then after that, it's what kind of experience can we provide for those athletes. So that's kind of the lens that I view things through. And of course, we have to do that within the defined resources that we have. And so you try to make the best decisions that you can to help provide that experience.
Not the same palatial estate that Notre Dame has now that you played in back in the day, right? I think most people think of Notre Dame and they have a beautiful rink now, Compton Family Ice Center. You were playing in the Joyce. It was the Joyce Center, right?
Yeah, yep, in the Joyce Center. Yeah, and it's funny. I just have so many good memories of that place, of stretching with the group before practice, or we had this old weight room over in the corner and the time that we spent in the weight room. So it's not always about just having the fanciest facility. A big part of that college experience is about the memories of the time you spend with, your fellow student athletes. So again, it just goes back to, we want to create an environment that's positive for the students.
You tried to bring women's hockey to Northern Michigan. I think maybe the only school that used that. The NHL had the funding to sponsor studies to hopefully bring more college hockey programs into the sport and such. You guys at Northern Michigan used it to look into women's hockey in a state where there are no Division I women's hockey programs. We've talked to a few Bulldogs out of the state of Michigan about that during this podcast. There's a lot of talent in Michigan. UMD has a pretty good player right now in Clara Van Wieren that, I'm sure people back there would love to see. What's it going to take, not just for Michigan, but what's it going to take? You guys weren't able to bring women's hockey to Northern, at least during your tenure. What's it going to take for women's hockey to grow in the West? Because so far it's a sport we've really only seen, grow among small private schools in the Northeast.
Yeah. Well, going back to one thing you mentioned there, that study was a collaboration between College Hockey Inc., the National Hockey League, and the National Hockey League Players Association. And what was so unique about our circumstance is that they weren't funding a study that was looking at just men's hockey, and they were not funding a study that was looking at both men's and women's hockey. They were actually funding a study that just was only exclusively looking at women's hockey and whether it fit at Northern Michigan. And I think that says a lot about how far the sport has come, that the National Hockey League is interested in funding studies on how to grow the women's game. I think because they recognize that the more people that are playing, the better it is for them, for their fan base, and so on and so forth. So that was really a great experience. We were a little bit limited by our facilities, that we share the Barrie Events Center with men's and women's basketball, and that might be changing, I've been told, and if that does change, that might create a new opportunity for Northern to look at that again. But yeah, my hope is that some school in the state of Michigan will kind of take that leap and sponsor women's hockey at the Division I level. I think, without going into my own personal opinion too much, but I do think there is some level of obligation and responsibility to provide something for young girls in the state of Michigan to aspire to. And I think that it's kind of incumbent upon the universities to look at this. And my hope is that one of the schools will, in fact, do it, because it just seems there are a lot of young girls playing hockey in the state of Michigan, and with 0 Division I programs, it's just not enough opportunity available to them. So, we'll see where that goes down the road, but I think it's a great opportunity. I think whatever school does, first of all, they're going to be immediately successful. There are so many players in the state of Michigan that are going elsewhere, either east or west, to play. So, and St. Thomas adding women's hockey and going Division I in all their sports, but women's hockey joining the WCHA, that was a good thing for the WCHA, because now you have 8 schools, you got 7 opponents, you can play everybody twice on the road, twice at home. It's a perfectly balanced schedule. So at the end of the year, you know who the top team is. So I think that was a big step in the right direction for the WCHA.
Being a former college hockey player yourself, and so connected inside what is still, a fairly niche sport when we look at it nationwide among college athletics, here you've got 2 programs that are well established, provide that thing to aspire to for both young boys and young girls hockey players. The teams themselves can't play much better than they have over the last 5 to 10 years. The building is fantastic. The community totes itself as a hockey community. And then how your predecessor, Josh Burlow, talked so much about the fan experience when he was here and trying to improve that. And I think that the team that he established within the athletics department really has done a good job of advancing the fan experience. But we still see attendance numbers that aren't what they were in the 90s in Duluth. Even when the teams were bad, the attendance at the old deck when I was a kid, the building was packed even to watch, hockey that wasn't at the level that these teams are playing at now. We see the NCAA regionals that aren't drawing crowds. So as you come in, maybe this is a loaded question for your first month on the job here at UMD, but how excited are you to have kind of those established programs and kind of get to work with the team that's existing here to showcase what has become a really, again, a marquee sport with the men and women who are contending every year for national titles again?
Yeah, incredibly strong programs. 5 national championships for women and 3 for men. They've done just a remarkable job here. I'm a little more positive on the attendance piece, and maybe it's somebody just coming in and I have not attended a game in person. I haven't been there, but I'm looking at it and seeing the kind of attendance numbers for the NCAA, and I think the University of Minnesota Duluth is 5th or so in the country in attendance. It looked to me like the capacity was at about 85% of the arena's capacity. So, when you think we've gone through these challenges with COVID, there's been some challenges with the economy and disposable income. People have to choose how they're going to spend that. I think that the university's done an incredible job of not only putting a great product on the ice, but also engaging with the community, and that the fans have been really incredibly supportive. So maybe I just see this a little differently than others, but I feel like what we need to do is just keep making that experience even better. And I read Matt's evaluation of the food the other day, and it looks like there's some great opportunities for fans to come and have a good experience with their families. And we hope to just keep things going in the right direction and provide that experience. And we might at some point pull together a committee that would be kind of a fan experience committee where we get a lot of representatives from the community and just say, well, how can we improve, and maybe do some brainstorming and see what suggestions people have. We did that at Northern Michigan, and it was incredibly helpful. It was probably, going into Phil Ballew's senior year, so it's probably about 3 years ago or so, but we made some changes to the arena and some changes to the fan experience that I think were very positive. So we'll continue to look at that.
He's a hockey guy that he's measuring his timeline in a player's year.
Yeah. I was about to say it took a while. We're deep into the episode, but you got the Phil Ballew name drop in there, so that's good.
All right, we've run long, so that means I don't get to ask you, Forrest, about the 2009 Alaska Wilderness Classic, which is still one of my favorite stories. I'll just tell readers.
I'm still recovering from that.
You're still recovering from that? Yeah. I was trying to get you a little endurance promo, some running talk into here for Mr. Grandma's Marathon, Zach Schneider, but I'll just tell everyone, I slipped it at the end of the story when Forrest was hired. Just search Forrest Karr, Notre Dame, Alaska Wilderness. Just search Forrest Karr, Alaska Wilderness Classic. University of Notre Dame has a story on him doing, which is one of the craziest races ever. If you think the Grandma's Double is crazy, Forrest doing the Alaska Wilderness Classic is right up there. Thanks for joining us on the podcast this week, Forrest. I appreciate it.
Thanks, you guys. Interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You can find the Bulldog Insider Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and rate us. For more Bulldog hockey coverage, visit the Bulldog Insider page at DuluthNewsTribune.com. That's new on the website. It's got everything from our recruiting databases. It's got the feed for this podcast. We got the Bulldogs Bites blog. It's got some notebook items from me, so go check that new page out. We're super excited about that. Zach, what's coming up to My9 here in the month of October?
Let's just go with this next weekend. That's about as far as I can think ahead. But we've got the women's home opener this weekend against Mankato. I'm actually on the road this weekend. My day job that you mentioned is taking me to Chicago for the Chicago Marathon. So Tom Hansen and Emma Stauber will have the call Friday and Saturday for the women's home opener against Mankato.
Thanks to our sponsor, Essentia Health, for their support of the Bulldog Insider Podcast, and thanks to all of you for listening. Anything you want to hear on the podcast this season, let us know. You can hit me up on Twitter at Matt Wellens. Thanks again to Forrest Karr. Thanks for Zach coming into the podcast as always, and we'll catch everyone next week.